Well, hello, everybody. Roger Durling, Executive Director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. And I'm very excited to have here Academy Award nominee, director Paul Greengrass, and his new film, News of the World, which has been nominated for 7 Critics' Choice Awards, 2 Golden Globe Awards, 4 Satellite Awards, 2 Screen Actor Guild Awards, Best Adapted Screenplay, which Paul Greengrass co-wrote by the Writers Guild of America, is winner of the Best Adapted Screenplay and one of the top 10 films by National Board of Review. Thank you so much, Paul, for being here.
My pleasure, Roger. Good to see you again.
Yeah, I'm going to start with,
lovely to be in Santa Barbara, if only virtually.
Virtual, exactly. But you've been here a couple of times. I want to come up with, your cinematographer, Darius Wolski, is nominated for a Critics' Choice Award. And I love the look of this film. It is something different from what I'm used to seeing in your films. We're used to seeing this sort of tight, handheld camera work in your films, and this is a departure. Can you talk about the look of the film and how you and Darius arrived to it?
There are new tricks in the old dog yet. Look, I think I wanted to do something different. I wanted to make a different kind of film. And the look of it was part of it. The most important thing, really, for me, which sort of stems back to even before I read the novel, was that I wanted to do a film that explored optimism and hope in dark times, and that really was, I think, arose out of the last film I did, 22 July, which was obviously about the threat of violent right-wing extremism, and I told the story of what happened in Norway, but that, of course, is, I believe then, and I think events have proved it to be, the great threat out there, as you discovered in your country not too long ago. I felt at the end of that the world was so dark, so bitterly divided. I'm a parent, my kids are sort of growing up into adulthood now, so it's a poignant time for any parent when your kids sort of start to move off into adulthood and make their own journeys. And it gets you thinking about, well, how actually are we going to get out beyond this bitterness and division? What's the road towards optimism going to look like? That was very much in my mind. And then that got me thinking that I wanted to make a film in dark times about hope. So that was the context. I was sort of looking, you start to think, oh, is it this, is it that? And then I read News of the World and my co-screenwriter Luke Davis's excellent first draft, which was really good too. And I read, as I say, the novel and Luke's screenplay, and I thought, well, this is it. This is that journey. This lonely newsreader in 1870, going around Texas in the shadow of the Civil War, reading in dusty town squares and old barns, trying to defend the idea of the truth. And then he meets this little girl and they have to go on this journey to take her home. I said, well, I thought that's now, that's here and now as well as then. And that really was the root of it. And so I thought, well, I'm going to make a film that's directly concerned with finding the light. And also, as part of that, it was going to be a Western, which obviously I grew up with those as a boy. And it's going to be an opportunity to make a different kind of film, a more beautiful movie, if I can put it that way. So that was the package, as far as I was concerned.
Mm-hmm. And but you still, and I'm going back to what Darius, and you guys did. You still were able to do a little bit of handheld. It adds this sort of tremulous quality to the.
Be in the present tense. I mean, we talked about it, Darius. I mean, obviously I hadn't worked with Darius, but I knew his work, and he's a genius. He's a brilliant cinematographer, you know, and he has that natural scale and a sort of painterly quality and a cinematic quality. And I said, you know, I'd love you to come and make this movie with me, and I want you to push me, because I want to do something that's different, you know, and let's see if we can't between us find a visual language that's true to us both. And that's, I think, what we did. And it was interesting because, well, first of all, Darius is such a great guy, you know, he's great fun and a really hardworking and just has a wonderful instinct for cinematography. But it was amazing to me how quickly we fell into a language, you know, that actually was quite a change for me, but still felt like, you know, me. It still felt in the present tense. It still had an intensity to it. So it was a great collaboration, and we had a lot of fun.
I want to focus on two beautiful passages. The way you introduced the Native American characters. The first time we see them, it's in this rainstorm, and then the second time we see them is after the dust storm, you know, and it is so almost magical the way they appear both times. You know, can you tell us about that choice?
Well, it was important to me that Kid and Johanna understood. I mean, she has grown up, you know, her original parents, of course, would have been German. And then she's kidnapped as a child and ostensibly brought up in the Kiowa tribe. And I wanted the film to reflect or give you an understanding of what had been happening in Texas at that time, which was you know, it was a struggle for the land. And
Correct.
The Kiowa tribe, of course, as we know, were the historic losers, you know, in a profound and disturbing way. And in a way, I wanted Kid to come to understand that and understand the depth of her loss. And so that first scene was really to reinforce for Kid what a child being orphaned meant, what a child being lost and left behind meant, because he's lying next to her as she's crying out to them across the river. And that really reinforces his decision to take her home, as he says in the next scene. You know, I found her. I'll take her. It has to fall to Kid. You know, he's the only person who can make this right for her, and that's what he does. But along the way, you know, you build the sense that they have fear around the Kiowa tribe, particularly when they enter the hill country, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to it and they finally meet the Kiowa tribe, they confound them because they give the girl a horse and are the means by which they survive. And so this sort of mystical encounter really it enables Kid to and the Kiowa chief to understand what's happening, the reality of what's happening. They're refugees in their own land. You know, they've been forced from it and they're going to have to run. And I have to say, it was incredibly gracious of the Kiowa tribe to agree to cooperate. You know, we went to them at the outset and asked them what was important to them about this film. They knew the novel. They liked the novel very much. And, you know, we had lots of discussions with them about what was important to them. What was important to them was that the Kiowa language was reflected, because that's very, very important to them, that the Kiowa language survives. And secondly, that they represented the Kiowa, the most, not all, but the most significant Kiowa community is in Oklahoma, actually, and they came down. And we had a wonderful few days together filming those sections. And, you know, it was, you can't but reflect on what happened not that long ago. Okay, 150 years ago, but it's not 500 years ago, you know.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, one of the most intense memories of the film, actually, was listening to them and their stories and feeling their support and love. That was amazing.
I love listening to you, and you know, and tell us all the nuance that we see visually. And that's one of the things that I was really taken with your film, that so much in visuals and in actions, you tell us, I said the word nuance before, like, for example, the encounter with the Alme posse and in that rocky terrain. Not only is a very intense action sequence, and we're at the edge of your seat, but then all of a sudden the shift in the dynamic between Joanna and Kid is, it's pivotal scene, and we see the growth between the two of them.
Sure. Can you? Well, that's the key. It's key. Look, the key to any successful action sequence, in my view, is that action has to be character development through action.
Yeah, but most directors don't do that. You know, Paul, they just bombard you with action, and they don't they don't tell you a story through the action.
Well, the whole point of that sequence was to demonstrate through that sequence that Kid and Johanna, who've been largely strangers through the first stage of their journey, they're facing up to the threat from these renegades. It creates a bond between them. It creates a bond for a number of reasons. First of all, she realizes that he's going to put his life on the line.
For her, yeah.
Yeah. He realizes that she's going to put her life on the line for him. She doesn't go. She won't leave. When he tells her to go, she doesn't go.
And she comes up with
the dimes. Yeah. She realizes how resourceful, he realizes how resourceful she is. And it culminates in what, to me, is the most beautiful moments of the film, I think, which are when, after that sequence is over, she sleeps that night and he puts the blanket on her, and then the next day they start to talk to each other, which is really the first time that they've had a substantive conversation about.
Oh, but even before that, Paul, I got emotional when she she paints the horse and says, you know, and she starts singing, you know, what is it that you, victory by lightning or something?
Yeah. Well, she's telling the story of what happened in her way, and you realize that she is forming a connection to him and he to her. And these strangers who are thrown together by the fact that he finds her in the woods at the beginning of the film, begin to develop an attachment. And that is at the heart of the film, I think, because the question asked, to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, which is, what is the way out of this? One of the ways out of this, by this I mean division, bitterness, how are we going to find a road forward, is to find attachments to each other wherever they lie. You know what I mean? In our world, we have, of course, our families, but in the modern world, our family shapes are often complex and often fast changing, and the relationships that are in front of us are often not specifically chosen by us. They are what happen. They just happen. And it's that ability to forge attachment, connection, understanding across divides, and come to understand that belonging comes through that, not so much necessarily from place. You know, it's you form attachments along life's road, however that road goes, and those attachments create belonging. That, I think, and that happens to ordinary people. That is the way I think that I see us moving beyond the divisions that we have at the moment. It's not going to be about leaders doing it for us. It's going to be about, and this is the thing that I thought that the Kid and Johanna story had to tell us. It's going to be, you know, ordinary people like Kid and Johanna out there in the middle, and no one ever knows who they are. They form this attachment. It's part of the healing process for me.
Did you, when you first read the novel by Paulette Giles, did you understood that you know, the connection to the now, the fact that, I mean, when the movie opens, you know, the country's completely divided, and there's even talk of a pandemic at the beginning of the movie. Did you saw the connection immediately to what is happening today in the United States?
I did. It wasn't as pronounced. I would say that when when I decided to take it on, there was Paulette Giles's novel, and there was my co-screenwriter Luke Davis's draft, which was extremely good. And I felt that what I could contribute to it was to try and intensify the sense of the real world and intensify the sense of its contemporary resonance, that what you're talking about there. I thought that was something I would be reasonably well equipped. So that was what I tried to do in lots of different ways. And what was very eerie about making the film was that we shot it just prior to the pandemic. We were all wrapped by Christmas, and then we started post in the UK in sort of late January, and then the COVID struck, and we were closed down about 6 weeks later. What happened? We then completed the movie virtually. What was interesting was that process of resonance seemed to deepen, even though we'd shot the movie. And what you're talking about the opening with the meningitis epidemic, and the sense that Kid discovers towards the end, the cholera epidemic. I'm not sure whether I should can I give spoilers or not?
People have seen the film.
Okay. So at the end, when he discovers that his wife died in the cholera epidemic, I thought that those things in the screenplay were just in the nature of the jeopardy of the 19th century world. But of course, as we started to put the film together in the shadow of COVID, those things became startlingly resonant. But we can take no credit for that. It's just, that was sometimes with a film, if it feels like it's right, times can make it feel more so. And that was certainly true of this film, I think.
And the structure of the script, has kind of like a Odyssey, Odysseus quality, where you go through this episodes, and every episode gets us deeper, and the two characters get closer. Was that was that in the novel, or is something that you
It was
emphasize?
in the novel. There was a different, I mean, the novel, it was a wonderful novel. You know what I mean? It's a wonderful novel with a great sense of lyricism. The two characters are so perfectly captured, and the unfolding, you know, paternal relationship that develops between these two lost characters. That's all beautifully portrayed. It you know, we shaped it and sharpened it and introduced some different elements, and in particular changed the way of the end, not the ending itself, because the ending, you know, there is you know, an optimistic ending in the novel, but it unfolds over quite a number of years, and that wouldn't really have worked in a cinema. And I think it was interesting, Luke and I's work, because we sort of did complementary drafts, and the film gods were very good to us because our different instincts sort of perfectly met in a way in the middle, if I can put it that way. And it was an interesting collaboration that way. But one thing that I did think when I read the novel was that this felt very much like The Searchers, the John Ford movie.
Yeah.
It felt like The Searchers in reverse, really. In Ford's movie, of course, Wayne's character goes on this odyssey to find the girl.
Debbie, little Debbie.
And we never really know. It's sort of never stated, but there's a reading of the film that says that that's actually his daughter.
Correct. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Although unspoken. But in any case, it's the odyssey to find the girl.
Debbie.
This film, in this story, in Paulette Giles's novel, the girl is there at the beginning, and the journey is to bring the girl home. And I thought that was very interesting and very contemporary. It had a resonance built into that story, and I thought it was also an interesting inversion in the Western tradition, because, you know, the lost child, the restitution, that's at the heart of many Westerns, you know, because of the dislocations of the Western frontier experience, if for no other reason. And I thought it was an interesting take on the classic sort of narrative shape of the genre.
He also, you know, you have this almost character, a man with no name, but instead of solving problems with the gun, he uses the truth and words, spoken words, and that it was a really interesting new dynamic for the Western.
Very much so, and that was one of the big appeals for me. I thought the newsreader, as opposed to the gunslinger, you know, or the lawman, was such an original idea, and it made again that character, the lost, lonely figure in the West, startlingly contemporary, because Kid has lost everything in the Civil War. All he has is a little bag with a few old newspapers, and he goes from town to town and reads them. But in that act of reading, he's reconnecting himself to his audience and small community to small community. He's binding a thread from one broken community to another through the power of the spoken word and through the healing power of storytelling. And that, again, it felt very resonant to me at the time, because it did seem to me that a fractured sense of the truth, and contested storytelling was one of the casualties of our age. But as COVID struck, and as I say, it became ever more relevant, because I think one of the things that we all suffered from, is the loss of our collective storytelling. We are the storytelling animal. We sit and tell stories around the kitchen table, out on the porch, in the street corner, in the cafes and bars and theaters and movie theaters and concert halls. That's what we do. And those collective experiences have been largely denied us over the last 12 months or more. And that made kids' mission very, very relevant, I think. And the way that he becomes more active in the storytelling as the movie goes on, as his stories become more contested in the world, so he doubles down on the truth and the idea of the truth, and the fact that there is a truth, an indivisible truth that he will stand behind. And I thought that was very interesting too.
Yeah, which culminates almost in the Durand sequence, the town of Durand, where, I mean, that sequence feels so, of course, so contemporary, and there is a direct correlation to our former president and the fake news.
Well, yeah, a little bit. Yeah, no, look.
No, I mean,
but it sat in that landscape then, and Cormac McCarthy, for instance, amongst others, has written in those sorts of communities where, which were at the heart of a bloody feud for the land. And it was going to be won, by force and through brutality. And there was going to be an historic winner, and there were going to be historic losers. And that was in the nature of that world then. Texas at that time was a dangerous place, no question. But also broken in the shadow of grief and great loss. And I liked that about Kid too. He has a compassion and a humanity about him that gives his storytelling a moral dimension. I liked that as well, without being preachy,
Yeah. I mean, but there was always the understanding that Joanna and Kid are on this physical journey, a literal journey, but they're internally, both of them are going through a journey of healing and of coming together as well.
And coming to terms with what's happened to each of them. And it's interesting you say that, because one of the I think probably one of the most important decisions that Luke and I made was to not involve any flashbacks. You could have told this story with quite extensive flashbacks, because if you think of the story of each character, by far the most dramatic things that have happened to them have happened in the past. In other words, for Johanna, her German parents and family were killed when she was kidnapped.
And then the Kiowa families also.
Kiowa tribe her Kiowa community and family were killed when the soldiers came in. So she's an orphan twice over in two violent and traumatic episodes. For Kid, he's fought through the Civil War and endured great suffering and seen great violence. And when he comes back, his wife is dead and he's lost everything. I felt that if we were to tell the story in flashback, we would take away from what the journey is about. the journey is about the search for a way out, the search for healing, the search for belonging, the search for getting to a better place. And I wanted the understanding of what had happened to each of those characters to come solely from us looking at them. They barely ever, with one small exception, ever discuss it together, what has happened to each of them. It's never part of their interaction with, as I say, one very short, tiny moment. We understand it from them, each character separately coming to terms. She goes back to, well, she sees her Kiowa family obviously on the other side of the river. She goes back to the cabin where her German family had been killed. And he goes back to San Antonio to visit his wife's grave. In those silent moments, the story is told. And that is acting of a very high order. And I think it's part of the emotional grip of the film, that it has that simplicity. I wanted it just to be that, so that when they are reunited together, you feel you've earned it, because the film has not allowed itself to deal with flashback storytelling, which I think would have cheapened, it's perhaps the wrong word, but it would have made it less emotionally intense and made the sense of optimism much less well earned.
Mm-hmm. Correct. So tell us about casting Joanna and finding this terrific actress.
Well, I'd love to tell you it was really hard. I'd love to tell you that it was what I thought it would be. You know, when you start any film, you always have a sort of what I call the rocks. You know, what are the rocks out there that we're going to have to navigate around? What are our challenges? And I thought at the outset that finding, you know, a young girl to play that part, the part of Joanna, was going to be the biggest single challenge that we faced, because she's not like a child's part in an adult piece where you can, to a certain extent, move off the young actor and play it on the adult faces or whatever. There are places you can go to deal with the lack of experience of the younger actor. The part demands, it's essentially rests on the two of them. Correct. And they don't have a lot of dialogue together. So it has to be told through the intensity of their performance, through the subtlety of the way they convey the storytelling and the emotional development. And so she had to be able to act toe-to-toe with the great Tom Hanks. And I thought it was going to involve seeing hundreds of young girls. I knew she would want to be German, so I knew that we'd be looking in Germany. And I thought it was going to be one of those split decisions where you choose someone and then you'd be in an agony of anxiety, hoping that you'd made the right choice. It wasn't any of those things, actually. She had just finished a film called System Crasher, which is a superlative film in Germany, where she plays a disturbed child. And Gail Mutrix, one of our producers, sent me the film a few days after and said, you should watch this. And I watched it. And I felt that night that it must be her, because I thought, what's the chances of there being two 11-year-old girls that good in Germany, you know? And I met her about a week later, and we spent the day together with her mum, and she was just remarkably assured, and she tested beautifully. And so the short and the long of it is that I thought it was going to be the hardest decision, and it turned out to be the easiest decision. And by the way, when we turned up on the first day, the first scene we shot was the scene where she and Kid meet in the woods. We pretty much shot the film in chronological order, not 100%, but very substantially.
Which must have been helpful, because the two of them start getting to know each other.
Definitely. yeah. But I remember having some anxiety because she was a young girl far from home. Yeah, she had a mum with her, obviously, but you know, it's not easy to come many thousands of miles and be on a, you know, big movie set with Tom Hanks and so forth. She was just brilliant. In fact, after about 3 takes, I remember Tom sat down next to me and said, "She is really good." And he was, I must say, extraordinarily good with her. He was so generous with the time that he spent to make sure that she could perform to the best. And but she's a natural. She's a very, very fine.
And I'm going back to the shootout at the with the Almay posse. You know, that was that a dangerous shoot, and she was part of it in that
It was.
rocky terrain.
It was. I would say, look, it wasn't dangerous per se because, you know, you're not allowed to be, but, you know, but it was a very physically demanding shoot. It was all outdoors. It was all out in the desert. It was a proper physical adventure for all of us, you know, and never more so than in those sequences when they were climbing those ridges, because we had to literally rope the crew up into position and tie us on because we were very high, and that took, yeah, it would be like a 2-hour climb in the morning and a 2-hour rope rappel down at night. And when you got there, there'd be a lot of rattlesnakes for company, which
great.
was a new for me, a new first for me. But oddly, it bred a great sense of camaraderie. I think it was my memory of it, and I think if you spoke to people involved in it, it was a very, very happy film. We were a happy band out there in the desert, and I think one of the reasons for that was the physical demands of it that sort of made us all, it just made it fun, new. It wasn't on a stage, it wasn't, you know, a sort of, it didn't feel like an airline meal. We were out there hewing the film out of the great outdoors, if I can put it that way. And the other thing that was I think made for the happiness was just the fact that it was a Western.
Yeah.
And there aren't many made. And I do remember one day we were out, it was sort of late afternoon. James Newton Howard had come out to visit, and he and I were talking with Billy Goldenberg, who cut the film so beautifully, and Gary Getzman and Greg Goodman, 2 producers. And we were sitting, they were setting up quite a complicated shot outside, and there was a sort of hour wait. So we were sitting while they were preparing the sort of wagons and the horses. And I just remember we all started giggling because it just felt like a dream come true for us all to be out in the desert. The light was beautiful. You know, you're in that magnificent Western vista, the horses, the wagons, the cranes, you know, and you just think this is for all of us, I think it was a dream come true, you know. And I think that you can feel that in the film, you know.
I'm jealous because before we came on, I told you that I'm a huge Western fan and The Searchers, and yeah. I would have loved to have been a fly on that set. You brought up James Newton Howard. The score is terrific. One of the things, I mean, I'm not I don't know enough about music, but one of the things that was noticed were the primitive sounds that are introduced in the score. Can you talk about, you know, working with James on the score?
Yeah, well, James and I mean, I've wanted to work with James for a long time, and it just came at the right moment for both of us. And I mean, he's a wonderful, wonderful composer, and I think he did extraordinary work, you know, as did Darius Wolski. I mean, I think James, funny enough, it was that conversation when we were out in the desert and we were discussing the fundamental musical idea, which is that, you know, let's make a score based on the idea that it's being performed by a consort of players who've gone off to the Civil War and come back broken, battered, their instruments broken, and somehow they have to recreate something. They're going to go in search of harmony, you know, and the journey is going to be uncertain, and but we want them to reach that moment of harmony. That was the idea, and that was absolutely what James delivered. And you know, he used a lot of old instruments, but he had at the heart of it, of the score, that achingly beautiful theme, which had a sort of, we used to call it the hymn. It had a sort of hymn-like quality to it, and a dignity and a repose, but yet a sense of hope and strength and of healing hard won. And I think that whenever you make a film, you hope for a score that just elevates your film beyond your dreams. And that's what James did for me. And I would say, as a film, when I think of the experience of making it, you know, now looking back on it, it's a funny thing when you make a film, because you're a jack of all trades and a master of none. You know, if you direct a film, you have to be able to talk to James Newton Howard and have enough knowledge for him to understand, but you have a thimbleful of knowledge compared to the vast reservoir of musical knowledge that he has. Equally, if you're talking to Darius Wolski, you have to understand enough about cinematography to be able him to understand that, you know, that the principles, that you understand the principles. But again, you know, a tiny fraction of what Darius Wolski would know about cinematography. And so it's the same in costume, it's the same in hair and makeup, it's the same in acting, of course, profoundly. It's the same in every area. And when a film goes well, you know what I mean? When it feels like a rich experience, there's an extraordinary feeling you have as a filmmaker where it's almost slightly out of body. You watch these maestros of their crafts. Wherever you look, you can sort of sometimes I would sit and watch as shots were put together. And as I say, it was slightly an out of body experience, because you have this sensation of all of the beautiful artistry of filmmaking, the collective endeavor, all these wonderful men and women who are giving their all to bring this film to light for you, and giving it more than you could ever have brought to it yourself. Do you know what I mean? And collectively, you see the thing take shape in a way that's beyond your wildest dreams. And then you, on top of that, stand and watch Tom Hanks and Helena play a scene, you know, those scenes of exquisite beauty. And you have to sometimes wipe a tear away from your eye, because you feel the great privilege of being part of the filmmaking community is to stand and watch it happen. And never more so, funnily enough, than in a Western genre, because the Western reaches back deep into the sort of foundations of American cinema. You know, it is one of those genres that whereby America has sought to tell her story, you know, about who she is and her hopes and dreams, and you know what I mean, and you feel it reaching back, and that made it, as I say, a great privilege for me personally. You know, I feel very blessed to have been able to have been a small part of such a great collective endeavor. That's honestly.
Well, you brought them all together and beautifully, Paul. I want to, I'd be remiss not to discuss Tom Hanks, and this is not the first time the two of you work together, but it is the first time that the two of you do a Western. It's your first Western, and it's Tom Hanks, although, you can
do
say
Woody.
he did Woody,
Yeah.
in Toy Story, but still it's his first Western. Tell us about working with him, and also the fact that, can you imagine he'd never done a Western before?
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, look, we had a great time making Captain Phillips together. I think for both of us, that was a fun and a movie that turned out well from both our points of view. So we were looking to do one together, but you've got to find one the way you're doing something different, and then this came along, and it was like, oh, well, that's perfect. And I mean, he's I can only say good things about working with Tom. He's look, he's an extraordinary actor. That's obvious. And an iconic movie star, who reaches back to Fonda and Jimmy Stewart. There's a lineage there of which Tom is a contemporary manifestation in a wonderful way. I do have a sense, if I'm honest, from the outside, of perhaps him slightly being taken for granted over in America, because he is always so consistently good. You know what I mean? That it's, oh, that's another Tom Hanks movie, rather than another extraordinary performance. He was the perfect actor for this part, and that's why he wanted to do it, obviously, because he's interested in storytelling. He's a great person to make a movie with, because he's done it all. He's acted and produced and directed and written, and you know what I mean? It's so you're able to, when you make a movie as a director with a movie star, you're basically on a journey together. You're roped together, going through a misty landscape, up a mountain in search of the summit, and you've got a small flashlight between the two of you, and it's 1,000 conversations you're having along. Is it this way, or do we do it like that? Is it there, or is it there? And there's no smarter, more committed person than Tom to have those collaborative conversations with. And I did discover one thing that I didn't know about Tom, and that is that he can ride a horse.
Oh, wow.
He can ride a horse. And more even than that, getting on and off a horse is not easy. I mean, it's okay if you've done it all your life, but I mean, he looked very much the part, I thought, and that's not easy. That's not easy.
He also is able to convey so much history in gestures. I was admiring, I mentioned I've seen the film twice, the scenes with Elizabeth Marvel, with Mrs. Gannett. There's so much that happens between the two of them that they don't speak about, but that we know that there is all this history between the two of them. It's a terrific acting between the
wonderful. She's wonderful too, and it was an important moment there, because first of all, it helps build the mystery, I think, of what happened in his past, And I think that's interesting because you sort of start to ask yourself different questions in the model. Did he leave his wife? Did she reject him? You know, what's the story there? I think that's an important part of the sort of narrative build, but also shows him as it's human.
Mm-hmm.
He has this relationship with Mrs. Gannett. You know, in another world, in another time, maybe something, but it's not given. It's not given to them.
What I
But
found, it was a nice fold to the relationship with Johanna, because you have two broken people that are lonely in the Johanna kid, but then also with Mrs. Gannett and him, you also have two people that are very, very lonely.
yeah, and that was my sense of the landscape. I think what Luke Davis and I went for was a landscape of lonely, broken people in the shadow of the Civil War. You know, every character. You were talking earlier about it's an odyssey. Well, an odyssey, a journey form in a movie is quite problematic because by its nature, it means you're going to be meeting characters and leaving them, meeting characters and leaving them, as opposed to moving forward with the story that where a cast of characters interact across the film. There's a sort of linear structure and a picaresque structure to an odyssey. But what we tried to do was to create a unity in the characters by making them all in some way or other connected by loneliness and brokenness and connected through the ravages of the Civil War. So all those characters, even Alme, you know, has a relationship that way.
And it was after 22 July, you know, this movie has a rare happy ending
Yes.
for a Paul Greengrass movie. Was that something you were looking for?
Well, I said at the beginning of this conversation, that was what I didn't know it was going to be, this film about this subject matter, the Western kid, Johanna. I just knew that after 22 July, I wanted to explore the road to healing, what the road towards restitution, what that was going to look. I didn't know what the story was, but that was what I wanted to do. And that was what was in my heart because, as I say, you know, my kids, when your kids move into adulthood, from teenage years into adulthood and start to move away, it's poignant as a parent. You start to ask yourself different questions about the world. When they're little, you gather them together to you and the world is what it is. But when they're going out into the world, you're saying, well, I mean, when is the world going to get back on its right axis? What is there going to be benevolence in the world for them? Is there going to be more and more division? You know, is the water going to continue to get more and more turbulent? And how are they going to chart their course through turbulent water? So those are the questions, you know, you want, well, what's the way out of this? What is it going to look like? What's the road to healing look like? And those were the feelings after 22 July, as I sort of went out the back into the valley beyond where I live with the dog. You know, you'd be thinking, well, I want to do a film that explores, not in a sentimental way, not in an unearned way, not in a sort of singing and dancing way, but what's a story that would show that road? Because the road's going to be hard out of where we are today, you know, but we will get out of this, I do believe, because our children will bring us out of this. That's what, you know, that's always been the way. And in a way that's built into the story of News of the World, I think.
That's great. You mentioned earlier that you were pinching yourself while shooting this film. I literally was pinching myself during this conversation. You're one of my favorite directors. I always look forward to chatting with you, and thank you for taking the time to to chat once again.
Pleasure. I only wish I couldn't be there in person, but
We will see each other in
my dear
person.
friend Greg Goodman, who produced the movie, literally lives about a half a mile away from your beautiful theatre up there on the
At the Riviera, yes,
Yeah.
which is closed now. But we will see each other again.
We
There will
will
be
be back, yeah.
there will be healing and the
There will.
movies news of the world. And thank you once again, Paul. And we'll
Thank you, Roger. Great to see you, and thank you, everybody watching.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.